going on, everyone? Today we're here with Lindsay Maasdorp. He's with Black First, Land First out of South Africa. And we appreciate this brother coming on the show today to give us the information of what's going on with the family out there in South Africa. So, Lindsay, thanks for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Philip. Also, thanks to Advice Media Network and to the viewers as well.
All right, Lindsay. So we have been paying attention to what's going on in South Africa. That's very important to us here in America as well. We heard that they're going to do the land with expropriation without compensation, and they're supposed to be moving forward with that. Where are we going on with that, and what's the time frame of that happening?
Okay, so if one knows historically that land disposition through colonialism and apartheid means that black people in this country remain landless. We define black through Biko's lens of African, Indian, and colored, the dispossessed landless majority of this country. And so, as you might have seen recently, that there was a motion tabled before Parliament by the economic freedom fighters, as well as then endorsed by the African National Congress and a few other parties, to say land expropriation without compensation, which is essentially supposed to return the land to the black majority without paying for it, because we know it was stolen from us. But one must, and the time frame of that now, one must understand that before this happened, in our former president, and who we still see as the Black First, Land First movement, as the people's president, President Jacob Zuma, was removed from power. Now, last year, towards the end of the year, there was a bill before Parliament which meant the land expropriation bill. And Jeremy Cronin, who is a white settler who forms part of the ANC, was heading up that committee. That bill was returned to that committee. And so after that, the ANC had their Congress to decide that they're going to agree that the program of land return without paying must be made now official through Parliament. But then with the coup that happened in South Africa to remove the former president, or the people's president, President Jacob Zuma, we now have a president called Ramaphosa, who belongs to the white monopoly capital faction within South African society. And so when this motion gets tabled by the EFF, what has happened now is there's a dual process, meaning that the original bill that was before Parliament, which should have seen it come to pass by April, May, is now basically null and void, even having run its course. So the tabling of this motion before Parliament by the economic freedom fighters and the ANC is actually pulling the wool over our eyes and deceiving us. Because it is not a motion to return the land back to the black majority, but instead it is taken up on to the Constitutional Review Committee, which essentially means that they are going to discuss whether or not there can be amendment of the bill, and not in fact an amending of the Section 25 of the Constitution, as was originally expected. One must also understand that it takes about 410 days to bring another motion to Parliament in line before Parliament again. So there will be no land expropriation without compensation before the national elections. What the ruling party, the African National Congress, as well as the economic freedom fighters who belong to the same white monopoly capital faction have done, in fact, is use land expropriation right now as a rallying tool to mobilize for votes leading up to the next election, noting that it will take another 410 days to bring it to Parliament. We must also note that the time frames of this current Constitutional Review Committee is August, meaning they are going to have discussions. They're going to go on a roadshow, a land roadshow, to ask the people if land must be returned. One must also understand that historically, there was no debates about taking and seizing black people's land. It was through conquest, pillaging, raping of black people and our communities that land was taken from us. We don't understand why elected leaders now have to go around and ask us whether we want land. Of course, we want the land to be returned to us. One must also understand that because they now have circumvented the process that was in place and removed the democratically elected President Jacob Zuma, they have now essentially knitted in a white monopoly capital, one-party state governance, which sees the Democratic Alliance, which is the official opposition, the Economic Freedom Fighters, which is then the next smaller party, and all the other smaller parties, including the Freedom Front Plus and the white monopoly capital faction of the ANC, agreeing on how to go about this or how to maintain land in the hands of white people's hands. We must also understand something very important, that South Africa is a constitutional democracy, meaning, and we've changed to become a constitutional democracy from a parliamentary democracy at the end of apartheid. What that means is that the power does not exist in the hands of 400 people's hands, but it is enshrined in our constitution, as well as in the constitutional judges who test whether the constitution's spirit is upheld when any amendments get done. So even if this process would go through, we'd have to then test the spirit of the constitution. And the first section of the constitution says that the land basically belongs to all of us, both black and white, and it entrenches basically land theft. And so if by God's gift to black people, we see that there's a 75% agreement in parliament, which is very unlikely given the fact that the ANC doesn't even enjoy 66%, the EFF only has 6%, and the DA controls more than 20% of the vote. It is unlikely to take place, but even if it went through that process and it came to these constitutional judges, it would still have to be tested legally. And in terms of the Roman Statute as well as the Constitutional Court, it is impossible to return back the land through the parliamentary and legal framework which enshrines white land theft. So as Black First, Land First, we've explained this and continue to explain this to our people. We must participate by going to these land roadshows, but only to clarify that it will not take place by August, because that's only a discussion point within the roadshow. It will not take place before the elections, because land is a contestation to win votes for these parties who are controlled from London and Stellenbosch, which is white controlled spaces. And it will not take place ever as long as South Africa remains a colonial state under the current political regime which defends white monopoly capital.
Now, let me ask you a question. I mean, because, you know, just as an American, you know, we don't have the majority population here in America, but you guys have the majority population in South Africa. So why is it? Can you tell me why is it that the majority of African people in South Africa, black Africans, why are they still subjected to the rule of a white supremacist system that has the minority there? They're the minority, they're less than you. Why are they still dominating and controlling you? Why?
Well, that's a good question, but think of it in this context. Historically, since 1652, when the settlers arrived in this country and ravaged across Africa, and also if you think of slavery in the United States and the destruction of the Aborigine population in Australia, the colonization by the British in India and so forth. One thing that they've managed to do in the African countries, and well, in all colonial spaces, is the decimation of the mind. And so if you think of the stages, if you think of colonialism and the stage, and then slavery as well, and then the apartheid system, at every breaking point, there is a moment where we think that we have supposedly been liberated or become free. And if you think of the stage between 1990 or 1989 and 1996, which frees Mandela, gives us the election, and then sees the constitution being written. It is a moment where the black and particularly African population, but black people as a whole in this country, get lulled into a normality that we are now free, not understanding that global imperial control, which controls from Palestine all the way to Marikana in South Africa, all the way to Timbuktu, right across to Kerala in India. That system of control means that we are unable to break free at an economic level, but also at a mental level. So at the stages in the current, if you think of this current new colony known as South Africa, the current president is Cyril Ramaphosa. One only has to look back at the trade union that was formed and which he was given money to form by the Oppenheimers, the fact that he was schooled, paid for his education, went through the trade union establishment, was escalated to the Secretary General position of the ANC, leaves Parliament, the ANC, comes back a few years ago to contest because they want him as the beacon of hope. So what imperialism and both abroad and then the settler colonizer at home has done very well is maintain the economic shackles on our country and countries throughout the globe. But then also, secondly, what they've done well is to prepare leader sellouts, who Malcolm X calls the house Negroes, to occupy positions of power, so that every moment when a liberation movement like Black First Land seeks to emerge, they are then obliterated or pushed down through these sellout leaders taking up key positions and returning the country back to the West. Think of a moment, just if you've been following the South African politic, you know that in the last 2 years, especially of President of the People's term, Jacob Zuma, his declaration on free education, his declaration on the mining charter, increasing the ownership of black people, particularly women and young people's ownership of the mines, his declaration on land returning to the black market, all those key points and his movements within the BRICS bloc with the Russian president and with Chinese as well, has prepared us for some kind of revolutionary moment where we can take back land and still be able to defend ourselves at an imperial level. But at the same time, just like they did with Lula da Silva by throwing in prison, President Zuma is now in the courts. Just like they removed Dilma Rousseff from Brazil, President Zuma was removed. Just like they attacked the Russian and the Indian economy, our economy was attacked and pushed to junk status. So the imperialists attack both at a global level, and I would also put a demand on us as the collective black oppressed people internationally, that we've not done enough to unite ourselves within the global fight. So to be able to defend ourselves when people like Cyril Ramaphosa, Julius Malema, Trevor Manuel, who works for Rothschild, rise up as political figureheads to betray and mislead our people, and become what Malcolm X terms as the house Negro.
Okay, so I have seen a couple of politicians over there that's totally against the black people, taking land back. They're totally against it. But these black people, as you stated, just no different than American black politicians. They don't really have the black community in the best regard. They get a little, like you say, get a few trinkets from massa, and they're happy, and they don't want to see black people come up. But as a collective, I mean, it's getting to a point, 'cause this is how I feel. If we can't have Africa, right? If we can't have African nations to run their own nations, and they're subjected to a white minority, I mean, what does that say about and you a man, what does that say about the men of that nation, that the men can't rise up and take what's rightfully theirs? I mean, how does that feel? I mean, because it would just bother me that we the majority, and yet we're still being dominated by this group of people. Yes, I know about the sellouts, but why isn't consequences happening for the sellouts?
Look, we must also, perhaps I didn't do enough justice. We are black consciousness movement, and Steve Biko warns us that the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. And there was the saga recently with Kanye West when he was talking about how slavery was a choice, as he termed it. That is a very interesting statement by Kanye West. And I relate it to the situation that we face as a black population, not only in this country, but globally as well. Kanye West, as a slave himself, whether he's a house slave, yes, he is, but he's still a slave. Mentally, he's not liberated. Now, and yet he utters the words, slavery was a choice. In the same context, persons like Cyril Ramaphosa, Julius Malema, and so forth, their minds are not liberated. But also the field Negroes, those who are working in the plantation, have not had a Harriet Tubman moment of being freed, or a Milka moment of being freed from the plantation to become runaway slaves. And this is the mental work that we need to do, to continuously expose the hand of the oppressor. So some of the work that we've been doing as Black First Land, for example, is telling people who is Johan Rupert, who is the chief colonizer here at home, who is Robin Renwick. He is the warlord who acts at the behest of the Queen of England. He's a real person with a real name, with a real face. He was here 2 weeks ago. Our people in this country and globally don't know that these are real people that control our economy in a real physical way and are able to maintain us as the oppressed. They don't. So some of the work that we need to do is not. So as we're fighting the enemy, we must also expose the enemy. Who is this person? Who is Robin Renwick? Who is the one that went to Robert Mugabe and made the Lancaster agreement and then betrayed the Lancaster agreement? Who is the one who agreed to the sunset clauses in South Africa? This is part of the work that we're doing, so that the field Negro, if we use X's language, is then exposed to a deeper consciousness that it is not good enough just to be angry with the betrayer who is the house Negro. But it is necessary to understand the face of the master, because you can destroy, and this is why BLF says peace amongst blacks, war against the enemy. Because you can destroy the house Negro, expose the house Negro, and you must expose the house, but you can destroy the house Negro today. But if you didn't expose the master, the house Negro will be replaced, as we have seen from Nelson Mandela into Cyril Ramaphosa, into Julius Malema. What we need to do is constantly hit sharply at the master, which we have constantly done. So we hit straight at white monopoly capital. So Lonman Mines, the likes of Absa Bank, the likes of the Renwick, for example. At the same time, expose those who work with these people, these sellouts, so that our people can understand why it is that we see betrayal at every time when we come close to liberalization struggle. But it's a long process, and we must remain committed to it, and we cannot do it just in South Africa. But as you have seen, perhaps, when Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, the one who was running against Ramaphosa for the presidency of the African National Congress, was the head of the African Union, she was pushing largely for the destruction of colonial borders across Africa, and she achieved a certain amount of success amongst that. This is the kind of mandate or strategy that we must employ, that we must not see ourselves as separate from Chicago, or separate from Abuja, or separate from basically any of the colonized world, but we must see ourselves as part of a collective working together to expose the hand of the oppressor, at the same time strengthening each other to create liberated zones, just like Zimbabwe was. Unfortunately, it's falling right now.
Yeah, now, definitely we have an issue with the colonizer, whether it's in the continent or all the way here, in the United States as well. Now, I heard you mention Julius Malema a couple of times in the EFF, and my position on them is that I listen to what the people say here. I'm talking about those in the colonizing group, and they hate Julius Malema with a passion. They really do. They hate him. They speak about him a lot. And anyone that they hate, usually I'm going to pay attention to, and I'm gonna have a liking to, because Malcolm X had always told us that anyone that they love that we need to actually watch, and the ones that they hate, that's the ones we need to run to. So, I don't know what issues you guys may be having, but in a situation, this is what we always do in the black community, whether it's in African nations or here in America. You may have two different guys, like you had Martin Luther King, Malcolm X. They both were fighting for the same thing. They just didn't have a certain agreement on how to do it, right? So in the sake of fighting for what's right for our people, can you come to the table, with Brother Julius or the EFF, and see maybe how you guys could work together? If you guys are fighting for the same thing, then why be against each other?
Okay, so I agree, and we agree completely with our brother Malcolm X, where we must not trust those who find favor with the oppressor, and we must be interested in perhaps in those who our enemy hates. Well, let's take two things that we've done, or let's look at one thing we've done and one thing that we will share to expose the truth about Julius Malema. The first one, recently AfriForum was attacking Julius Malema and said they're going to look to prosecute him. AfriForum is a right-wing racist organization that should be banned in this country. Right. And we are laying charges against AfriForum for saying that apartheid was not a crime against humanity with the Equality Court. Now, when they came out to attack Julius Malema, immediately we said hands off Malema. Unequivocally, unapologetically, we did not run to, but what did Malema do to us? It was a principled black position that aligns itself to our position of peace amongst blacks, war against the enemy. When our black brothers, whether they be house Negroes or field Negroes, comes under attack from white people, we will defend any black person against white people. At the same time, we will expose them to our black community if they are sellouts. But we will never allow white people to tarnish or destroy black people, because we know they do that to further the white project. And we've done that practically. But let's look at Julius Malema in line with what Malcolm X says. Now, Lord Robin Renwick is the person who brokered the Lancaster Agreement. Basically, is the one who brokered the deal in Zimbabwe that enshrined land theft and colonialism. When Robert Mugabe breaks from the deal, he's the one who oversees now the return of land via Emerson Mnangagwa in Zimbabwe. In South Africa's context, he was the ambassador from the UK, from Britain, but serves directly at the behest of the Queen. To the extent that when in 89, around there, when the negotiations were happening, he is the person that makes sure the lands isn't returned. In fact, in his meeting with Nelson Mandela, he tells Nelson Mandela, don't nationalize the mines. The reason why the mines wasn't nationalized when the ANC took power in 1994, political power, is because at the request of the Queen via Robin Renwick, there was an instruction to now don't nationalize the mines. Now, the same Robin Renwick, I think it's about 2 years ago, 2016, the same Robin Renwick is the same Robin Renwick who Julius Malema and his top leadership go and meet in London. Now, the same Robin Renwick who Julius Malema goes to meet in London under the Chatham House Agreement. If you know the Chatham House law, it basically states that anything discussed in that meeting cannot be shared publicly. After that meeting, Malema tells us he will release the information. He doesn't do that. The second thing he says that he doesn't know who Renwick is. Renwick comes out clearly, so we know that this is a fabrication and it's untrue and it's a misleading of our people. We must also understand that before Malema goes to London, he calls for the occupation of Absa Bank because they have stolen money from as far back as 89 from the Reserve Bank, which is 3.2 billion, for which some of our BLF members, 26 of us, were arrested and are still 2 years going on trial for that. Post him coming back from London, he stops that call. Before that, he goes to the Chamber of Mines and sets out certain requirements of transformation within the Chamber of Mines, in the mining sector. Post that, he objects to the mining charter, which gives a measly 30% wants to give a measly 30% back to black people. But he rejects that. Robin Renwick comes out in his book a few weeks ago, and he says quite emphatically that Julius Malema, when he spoke to Julius Malema seemed not to have any real interest, keen interest, to nationalize the mines. And he also says that it was on Julius Malema's request that he met with Julius Malema. Another indication of what Julius Malema has not done to test where his allegiance lies. He has given votes. Now, this country, we say in this stage, people have often argued that the ANC decided in this two-stage revolution and taking political power and then fighting for land. We don't agree with that, but we can understand that they made the decision. We don't agree with it, but it's a decision they made. The same ANC that EFF agrees with in relation to this two-stage theory or national democratic revolution, as they say. Now, imagine this. Through President Nelson Mandela, the ANC government, the black government, wins political power. Yet, the economic freedom fighters, under the leadership of Julius Malema, gives power in the most important economic metro, Tshwane and Johannesburg, as well as then in Nelson Mandela Bay. He gives power to the Democratic Alliance, which is a white, racist political organization. The same organization that was founded by Tony Leon's father, who hung liberation fighters. Now, he then threatens, and Malema says on 3 occasions, he says it in relation to Helen Zille being racist. She's the Premier of the Western Cape. He says it in relation to Patricia de Lille, and he says it and how the DA is treating Patricia de Lille, and he says it in relation to the evictions that are happening in Tshwane. He says if the DA continues to ill-treat and remove the people in Tshwane and Johannesburg, he then says, because Helen Zille is racist, and the third one is because the Democratic Alliance voted against land expropriation, he's going to remove the metros. Who does the metro? Is the metros controlled by today? Still the same Democratic Alliance. As revolutionaries, we cannot be bamboozled by rhetoric. We must be able to assess what the person is saying in line with what practical steps are taken in line with changing the material conditions of the people on the ground and who the people interface with. Why is it that that Julius Malema could go to Stellenbosch Business Forum and tell them directly they don't want to take all land back from colonial land thieves, but they only want the unused land, the land that white people basically are not using, the land that is not fertile and arable. Why can he say those statements and still we think that he has the black majority's interest at heart? How can he meet with a warlord and then begin to insult Robert Mugabe and we still say that he is a person who agrees with the black oppressed majority? Why is it when he says he will shut down ABSA for their theft of the black people's money, he does not do that? Why is it that we must trust that he has a black people's interest at heart if he, as the leader of the economic freedom fighters, said that he will take the metros out of the hands of a racist organization such as the Democratic Alliance, but to this day has refused to do that? There can only be one conclusion, that he is, as we have said, is controlled by London, and he can't make these moves for two reasons. One, if he makes these moves, he'll be exposed as an agent of white monopoly capital, and number two, he will go back to jail because he stole money and he bankrupted Limpopo. So they have court cases just like they do with all African leaders. You are caught between a rock and a hard place. You must stay allied with whiteness, or you'll be exposed and we'll throw you in jail.
Now, I did hear, to what you were saying, I did hear him say that they wanted to take the land that they wasn't using. For instance, if the white farmer had 100 acres of land, but he only using 25, he did say that he'll want to take, like, for instance, the 75 acres that he wasn't using and let the white farmer keep the 25. Now, there's a few things I want to ask about that. They're putting out a propaganda here in America, and they're crying all these white tears saying, oh, the farmers being murdered all over the place in South Africa. Is that true?
Absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. But maybe just 2 points, one that you just raised and then the one that you asked now. We must understand that in South African agricultural sector, only 20% of our land is arable. That means only 20% can be used in a way that is economically beneficial. That's the 20% he wants to leave in white hands. So just to remember that when you think about 75% taking for black people, 20%, 25% leaving for white people. That's the context. Then on the killing of white people, firstly, I have no sympathy for white tears, none whatsoever. And if white people are experiencing a black people who fight back, then it would be a day that has not come soon enough. Because 18,000 black males are killed in township violence, and the township is a construction of white society supremacy. Rape and murder pillages black townships, and we know this is a construction of white supremacy. I think if white people really had any sense of humanity and morality, they would begin to understand that black people are not things to be killed, raped, and murdered in the ghettos just because white people's wealth must abound. So if white people are crying because they are dying, firstly, we don't even have arms to take up this war right now. We don't have capital and arms to take up this war. But if white people are dying, it would be a death that would be suited or something that would be just toward them, because they are the reason that the murder and slaughter of black people happens on a daily basis. I'm from an area called Grassy Park. It's on the Cape Flats. There is not a day that goes by where there are no gunshots and killing of black people by black people in the construction of violence of the ghetto by white people. So I think we mustn't take white people's tears too seriously. It's basically like the Israelis today who are telling us that that the Palestinians were marching with arms to the fence when they brutally massacred and murdered our brothers and sisters and innocent babies and parents in that. It's the same logic. White people continuously think that their tears and black fear must be entertained while we continue to get murdered and slaughtered around the world. It's like when the movements in the States march against police brutality, and then all of a sudden they talk about how evil black people are and get angry at someone like Mika X. To us, BLF, Mika X is a hero. because he responds to the evil atrocities of an imperial settler colonial system that continues to oppress black people on a daily basis. White ears have no place in black liberation struggle.
Yeah, and then you have a group called the Sweetlanders. You know who that group is?
The
Sweetlanders, Suidlanders.
Oh, Sweetlanders.
Yeah, you know who they are?
I've heard about them, yes.
Okay, so you have the main guy, and I've covered that group many times. He's always over here speaking to people like Alex Jones. You know who Alex Jones is from InfoWars?
I've heard about InfoWars. I don't know Alex Jones.
Okay, so he's over here crying to Alex Jones, talking about they're murdering us and we got to defend ourselves. And then they had a picture recently come out where they have a bunch of guns, all these white folks, and he's shooting targets and they training basically to kill blacks. That's what they're training to do. Talking about a civil war is going to happen right on the soil where there's a majority black population. Now, where are they getting all the guns from?
They've never, ever, they've always had guns. White people, the Broederbond, and so the Broederbond runs way back before Eugene de Blanche to 1950s, 1940s, and the construction of South Africa as an Afrikaner folkdom. And even before that, that is when the South Africa is created in that way. These people have never given up one weapon. They've never put away any arms. They armed themselves. They removed all arms from black hands. And they not only have the capacity to, but in fact, they do kill black people. This is not, you can look at the farm murders of farm workers. You can look at the coffin case. You can look at a recent incident where someone was apparently mistaken for stealing a tractor. Mm-hmm. Gets killed. There are different cases that you can look at where black people, in fact, get killed by these people. These people, so we are living, when we say, there's something that we coined a few years ago, we live in a post-apartheid society. Early on, we spoke about the myth that says we moved, every time we end colonialism, we see the supposed end of colonialism or the supposed end of apartheid, we come into this mythical that everything is beginning again, it's new. Nothing has changed. Yes, we can sit on the same bench as a white person. Yes, we have more black faces or puppets that control the administrative process of how to persecute black people. But essentially, at the fabric of society, we live in a society where black people are killed, both legally and illegally. Where black people are imprisoned both legally and illegally. So people like Sud and AfriForum and all these different organizations that continue to allow farmers to hoard guns, that when they call for marches, and I don't know if you saw that march that they did a few months ago now, all these white farmers and openly carrying weapons. This is the society that we live in. We live in a society where you not only have a police force that will defend white land thieves, you also have a securitized white spaces. So that's both in the suburbs and in the farmlands. I can tell you in Franschhoek, Rupert owns more than 10 farms. Jan Rupert owns more than 10 farms in a row. If you go there, you'll see private security that there's double electric fences, ditches in the middle like you're in some no man's land, four-wheelers driving around, 4x4s roaming his different farms, armed, all armed security. For what? These people, they live with the with the reality that they are land thieves, and they're hell-bent on maintaining themselves as the owners of this land while we remain slaves and workers on this land.
Yeah, and you talking about you could sit next to them, and just like in America, you have integration. But one thing Malcolm X said, he said, if I got a knife in my back 9 inches, you pull it out 6 inches, and you call that progress, but the knife is still in my back. And that's just kind of where we at today. It sounds like you guys are in the same position. So, I feel that we are the only ones that can liberate ourselves, whether it's in the African continent or whether it's here. also in America. Now, for them, so why is it that you guys can't have guns? If they can have them, why can't you have them?
Well, maybe there's three questions to that. The one is that the one angle we must always remember is that soldiers without political education are potential criminals. That's the one angle that we mustn't, in terms of having guns and protecting ourselves or waging any kind of armed revolutionary struggle. We must remember that Sankara teaches us that the mind is as important as the hands that carry the guns. Because if we don't ready the mind, we will turn those guns on ourselves. The second thing that is important is a question of economics and solidarity. One doesn't just have guns in society. One has to have solidarity. One has to have the economic means to make those things possible. And the third reason is simply, quite frankly, the broader society, the broader black population must be ready. You can't wage any kind of armed struggle without exposing the enemy and showing some kind of spiritual basis or moral basis for defending and strengthening oneself for taking back land. We have seen this in Burkina Faso. We have seen this in the Arab Spring, that those who have engaged in any kind of conflict, whether it be the burning of a parliament, whether it be the burning of oneself, whether it be attacking the enemy, if there is no revolutionary movement or the people are not prepared enough to take power, that revolutionary process will be quelled and the gains will be reversed. Burkina Faso today, just a few years ago, they burned down the parliament and exposed the killer of Sankara, which was Blaise Compaoré. Has there been a revolutionary movement to take power in Burkina Faso? No. Egypt and Tunisia, countries like that, we see the same thing. So we must remember that, and this is why we are great defenders and supporters of the former president, or the people's president, President Jacob Zuma, because he didn't get ahead of himself. The readiness of the country, both at a geopolitical level and at a local level, entrenching himself amongst the people and still being able to operate in the political sphere, even within the African Union, means you create the readiness for society. So as much as we are eager and understand the problem of this country and are very ready to do what is necessary to liberate this country, we must be patient and we must be committed to readying the masses of our people to ensure that when we take power, we are able to do so that in a way that does not reverse the gains that we have made as a black bloc in this country.
Well, what I was getting at about the guns is like, okay, if they have guns to protect themselves, then why can't the black population have guns to protect themselves? I'm not saying to go start war with nobody, or I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if you can't have guns, then they shouldn't be to have guns, and the government should go confiscate their guns. That's what I'm saying. If it's a law, is it a law not to have guns in South Africa?
No. You can have weapons, but you have to go through a particular kind of process to have them and to have the necessary paperwork. And a few years ago, I think it's not a few years, maybe 10 years ago now, where guns were confiscated left, right, and center, and the administrative process that you must go through to be able to carry a gun is also extensive. It's also costly. And it doesn't become that easy and that viable. One must also remember that the construct of society here is that you're not facing direct violence from white people on a day-to-day basis in a way that you would need to defend yourself using a weapon. You are living in a township or in a community, because our place is very segregated, and it was built on apartheid logic of white people live there, and it's still like that. So a weapon today would likely be used to inflict violence on black people. So this is what I was talking to when I was talking about the mind, Sankara's. Like, right. Even if our people had weapons now, they would still turn their guns on each other. For example, it's not a white person robbing you in the street. It's a black person. It's not a white person killing you necessarily if you're living in towns. It is black people. But the construction of that violence is white people. And black people don't understand that yet. So criminal elements, there are very few criminal elements that have advanced to a level of going to white suburbs, for example, or to white spaces and taking back, repossessing what was stolen from them. Most crime activities are still happening in black spaces. And that is because of how apartheid designed this country to maintain the ghetto or black spaces as spaces of inhumanity, of violence, of rape, of chaos. But that construction itself and the non-being nature of that community is so that the white community can enjoy, surplus and humanity and good, and it's this heaven and hell kind of. But I'll tell you this one story which was very interesting to me. I was on the train one day running through one of those long trains here in Cape Town, and I met two criminals. One, well, they would be called criminals. One threw the other one. Both were black people. One threw the other one off the train at the stop, and I asked him, why had you done this? He said, no, this person is stealing from our people on the carriage, meaning black people. And he articulated that he too is a criminal, but he doesn't steal here. He goes to these particular spaces. And there's a great political understanding, ideological understanding there that the person kind of breathes in there when he makes that statement, that it is unacceptable for us to ravage each other on a daily basis, even as criminals. Because the construction of crime is because of white people, and it exists to benefit and maintain white people as wealthy, comfortable, enjoying life. And there's something that we can learn from that as people who are thinking about how society configures itself and how we are to change the society.
Yeah, and I have I want to cover one more question with you before we have to wrap up. Now, if they have all these issues against black people, right, and it's a 90+% black country, why don't they just say, you know what, we don't like these black people, obviously they're a problem. Why isn't it an option for them to leave and go back to Europe? Why?
Well, that can't happen. That can't happen.
They don't want
imperialism. Well, they don't. You see, imperialism. Europe is built on the backs and the backs of slavery and colonialism. Not only historically but present day. Our mineral wealth. Africa is the reason that Europe can be what it is. Free education can be given in Germany, in Switzerland, in these countries because we are not able to enjoy humanity in Africa and now in our case in South Africa. So when Van Riebeeck arrived in South Africa as a criminal, he had a choice to stay there as a criminal or come here. In the same way, Johan Rupert now, who is the embodiment of a Cecil John Rhodes or a Jan Van Riebeeck back in the day, he is the chief colonizer. He must run this country, this political administration of this country from behind closed doors. He practically does that. I can give you a number of incidents. He's the reason why Ramaphosa is president today. He's the reason why Nhlanhla Nene was imposed as the Minister of Finance after Des van Rooyen was removed after 2 days because they threatened the president. 12 bankers, including this person Johan Rupert I've talked about, told the ANC top leadership, if you don't remove Des van Rooyen and replace with our person, Nhlanhla Nene, we will take out 500 million out of this country. They replaced with Nhlanhla Nene. They still took the 500 million. It was found to be true at the Competition Commission. So when you talk about white people staying in this country, and there are countries in Africa where there are no or far less white people staying, and they don't run the administration. But they are still colonial, or they are still imperial states where the minerals and stuff get shifted. But in South Africa, you see, because it was the British and the Dutch contestation, the agreement between the settler colonizer and the imperial, the agreement between the Afrikaner and the British was that you get to run. So this is the agreement after the Second Anglo-Boer War. The agreement was you get to run the state, the administration of the state, the likes of Johan Rupert. You funnel the diamonds, the minerals, the wealth out of the country. And we benefit at an imperial level so Europe can continue to be built. This is the agreement they have. It is now impossible for the British to say, okay, white people, you must all go back to your homes. We're not going to have this anymore. It is also impossible for them for the Afrikaner to say, we are going to stop sending your mineral resources to the British and the likes, to the America and the likes, and we're going to control this internally now. The Pact of the Anglo-Boer War and the Union of South Africa ensures that there's these two levels of power, at the imperial level and at the settler colonizer. So everything runs through two people in this country. In South Africa, it is Johan Rupert as the chief colonizer who runs ahead of people like the Oppenheimers, Maria Ramos, and so forth. And at the imperial level, through the Queen, it is Robin Renwick who runs and directs to the imperialist world. And that's how South Africa functions. It's been like that since the Anglo-Boer Wars into the Union of South Africa and the formation of this country as a supposed nation state.
Yeah, and like I said, we all just gonna pray that the sun increases power, and then they have a worldwide shortage on sunscreen. That will help too. But with that being said, it was good talking to you, Lindsay. Lindsay, can you tell us how to people that may want to ask you some questions about the BLF? How can people get in contact with you or the group?
Okay, I'll give you a few mediums. Firstly, if you want to follow or see what we are writing, you can always go to Black First, Land First. Sorry, it's blf.org.za. It's the website blf.org.za. You can also follow a publication called blackopinion.co.za. Then you can also look on Twitter. You can actually go to a profile by our president, Twitter profile, which is at, I'll spell the surname, it's MNGXITAMA, Gitama. You can also follow me on Twitter, it's Lindsay Maasdorp, that is at LINDSAYMAASDORP. And you can also go on Facebook, you can also follow on Twitter, it's Black 1ST, Land 1ST. And on Facebook, it's Black First, Land First. You can just message us or just message or tweet, and we can always send you back. And you can also email blackfirstlandfirst@gmail.com if you want to stay intact.
All right, and also, are y'all selling some of those shirts?
We're not selling them. We generally give them away to members. If anyone is interested in getting the T-shirts, then we can perhaps talk about it and see how much is needed in a particular occasion, and just think about how we get that there and what is the cost implication to get it there.
Yeah, I mean, if somebody want to give a donation or something like that, a certain donation amount to help, because everyone needs money to keep going, organizations, right? So I think it'd be good to, hey, if some of your brothers and sisters here in America say, hey, I like to donate, get one of those T-shirts, it'd be a good trade-off, right? So, I definitely look into that myself. But Lindsay, I thank you for joining us on the show today, giving us the information what's going on in South Africa. You stay in touch, and you be safe out there.
Thank you very much, and thanks to the viewers as well. Israel too.